The year 1888 became known as the Year of the Three Kaisers in Germany. The Soldier King, Kaiser Wilhelm I, had ruled Germany since its unification in 1871 after defeating the French in the Franco-Prussian War. Wilhelm I died comfortably, leaving behind a strong German empire to his eldest son, the heavy pipe-smoking liberal Frederick III. However, Frederick would not be the Kaiser for long. Already severely ill at his ascension to the throne, after just 99 days into his reign, Kaiser Frederick III passed away from cancer due to the heavy smoking. His 29-year-old son, the ill-tempered Wilhelm II, became ruler of Germany. His administration led Germany into the 20th century down a path of militarism, nationalism, and imperialism, which culminated in the collapse of the German Empire in the trenches of World War I. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, join the Videntian Guards, and subscribe to help me reach 70,000 subs by the end of the month. If you'd like to go a step further, you can also support me on Patreon, where you'll get ad-free viewing, all the maps from the videos, and other exclusive content. Thanks so much. Now, back into the video. History was forever changed on June 15, 1888. Kaiser Frederick's British physician, inspecting the tumor, stood stunned. The lump was shrinking. Day by day, the cancer retreated, a miracle defying all reason. By August, Frederick's pallor faded, his strength returned, and whispers of recovery echoed through the court. To Victoria, to Bismarck, and even to the skeptical Prince Wilhelm, it seemed divine intervention had spared the Kaiser. With his health restored, Kaiser Frederick III wasted no time plunging into the work of liberalizing Germany. Their educational system was expanded as he believed a liberally educated class would forge a prosperous state. Schools sprang up, curricula broadened, and the Kaiser's dream of a thinking, tolerant Germany took root, challenging the old Prussian obsession with military might. Yet, this was not without its own set of challenges. Frederick's close ties to Great Britain, nurtured through his marriage to Empress Victoria, daughter of Queen Victoria, kept the Anglo-German bond strong. He looked to Britain's constitutional monarchy as a model, aspiring to transform Germany into a similar system, where the Kaiser's power would be checked by a robust parliament. This dream put him at odds with his own son, Wilhelm II, the brash 29-year-old firebrand who scorned his family's British ties. Wilhelm craved military expansion, a Germany that would seize its place in the sun through might and ambition. His allies were the conservative and nationalist factions in the Landtag, who chafed at Frederick's progressive ideals, whispering of a stronger, more aggressive empire. For now, Frederick played a delicate game. Despite his disdain for Bismarck's policies, he kept the Iron Chancellor in place, a calculated move to curb the growing influence of Wilhelm's nationalist supporters. Bismarck, ever the pragmatist, was allowed to renew the reinsurance treaty with Russia in 1890, a secret pact first forged in 1887 to keep Russia from allying with France. A Franco-Russian alliance would be a disaster, trapping Germany in a two-front war squeezed between the two great powers. Frederick, no fool, saw the necessity of this diplomatic tightrope, even as he worked to maintain harmony with Britain. Empress Victoria's influence was key, her royal connections ensuring a British alliance was built as Frederick secured the Anglo-German Agreement, a diplomatic coup that saw Germany gain the strategic North Sea island of Heligoland, while recognizing Zanzibar as a British dominion. The deal was a masterstroke, balancing Germany's ambition with British goodwill, and it signaled Frederick's intention to steer the empire with diplomacy, not war. Naturally, the conservative factions in Germany opposed Frederick's liberal policies. Bismarck himself was displeased with the Kaiser's changes, especially the reduction of power to the Chancellor in favor of the Reichstag. Officials in the German military complained that the Kaiser had conducted treason against Germany's interests, and it was not long before threats to the Kaiser's life began to emerge. Initially, most of these plots did not amount to much. The fog of assassination hung over most of Europe during this time, and plots were relatively common in most states. The liberal reformer of Russia, Tsar Alexander II, had multiple attempts on his life before he was assassinated in 1881. Germany, the most powerful country in Europe, was not immune from such plots and schemes. As Frederick began to implement his moderate reforms, socialist, liberal, and minority parties in the Reichstag gained seats, worrying the conservatives. The nobility feared a loss of their privileged positions in the military. One such ill-content was Chief of the General Staff, Field Marshal Alfred von Waldersee. He saw Germany as a strong, robust nation surrounded by strong and ruthless enemies. The French, Russians, Ottomans, Austria-Hungary, and even Catholics and Jews to Waldersee were threats on all sides. The Field Marshal saw democracy as a corrupt conspiracy to overthrow the ruling classes of nations, saying, quote, "Everywhere the masses are on the move, everywhere there is rebellion against authority, the negation of all religion, the generation of hatred and envy against those with wealth. We are probably facing major catastrophes," unquote. If Germany were to live, an all-encompassing war of survival was to be unleashed upon Europe. Bismarck mediated an agreement in 1892 between Britain, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, recognizing the current status quo in the Mediterranean. The agreement's actual objective was to hinder Russian expansion in the Balkans, as well as her ambitions over controlling the Dardanelles and Constantinople. While the Chancellor encouraged curtailing a war against Russia, many in the military welcomed a war to weaken their eastern foe. Feeling that war was inevitable, the German military cabinet saw the Austro-Italian-English bloc as means of starting a military conflict against the Russians. Using his political connections in Vienna, Waldersee attempted to persuade Austrian ministers to anticipate the actions of Russia by launching a preventative war at a time of their own choosing. When the Chancellor discovered the extent to which his policy was being crossed by the military, Bismarck told the military cabinet that war with Russia would now be, quote, like committing suicide out of fear of death. Field Marshal Helmuth von Moltke, the first chief of the General Staff, assured Bismarck that they had no intention of meddling with his foreign policy, but Waldersee would not hear of it. Several earlier plots had arisen from within the military, but none yet materialized. Bismarck stayed loyal to the Kaiser, and many in the military would not go against the Iron Chancellor, even Waldersee. This all changed when Bismarck retired after a few years, some claiming Frederick forced him out for political disagreements, so the military began to make their move. Frederick dismissed Waldersee from his position as chief of the General Staff, citing his aggressive anti-Russian attitude following the renewal of the reinsurance treaty in 1890. After Waldersee's dismissal, Germany's coup d'etat was organized and ready. The conspirators intended to depose Frederick in favor of his militaristic son, Prince Wilhelm, and launch an all-out attack on France and Russia, dragging Austria, Italy, and Britain with them. In September 1891, the putschists made their move. Waldersee's men managed to seize much of Berlin, taking control of the Prussian Landtag, forcing Frederick's newly appointed chancellor, Leo von Caprivi, to flee. The insurgents marched to the Reichstag, which was held by the government-aligned troops, and a siege began to take the building. A vicious street battle in central Berlin ensued, with the conspirators capturing the building. However, the coup began to collapse the following day, as their attempt on the Kaiser's life failed, and troops under Paul von Hindenburg encircled the conspirators in the Reichstag. Several of the ringleaders were either killed or arrested. When Waldersee received word that the plot failed, he committed suicide in the Herrenhaus, while the rest of his conspirators were rounded up, detained, or court-martialed. The Prussian military, as conservative as it was, could never raise a sword against the Kaiser, preventing popular support from within their ranks. Frederick, having witnessed the push from the relative safety of his palace, grew even more determined in pursuing his reforms. Substantial constitutional changes reduced the power of the individual German states and centralized much of the authority in his hands to push his liberalization programs across the entire empire. Germany was pretty quiet for the next 2 years. Its economy continued to soar under Frederick's reforms. Socialists and liberals continued to gain in the Reichstag, their numbers swelling as Chancellor Caprivi pushed through labor laws. The workday was capped at 8 hours, child labor was banned except for apprenticeships, and education made mandatory for every child. A constitutional framework was established with a parliamentary democracy guiding Germany. On the world stage, Frederick tried to keep Germany's neighbors at arm's length, simultaneously at peace but also isolated. France, still recovering from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, was eager for round 2. Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen planned a daring invasion to crush France should it seek retribution. Frederick forbade such plans, ordering Schlieffen and the remaining hawks to abandon a preventative war against any European power, especially France, but he was losing control over the army. He looked to diplomacy to build a web of alliances to isolate France, preventing a Franco-Russian détente. The dual alliance with Austria-Hungary held firm as a cornerstone of Germany's strategy. Yet, Frederick knew this alone couldn't tame French or Russian ambitions. He needed Britain. The British, hungry to expand their empire, proposed a naval treaty to counter France. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, head of the Kaiserliche Marine, demanded a mighty fleet of dreadnought battleships to rival Britain's Royal Navy. But Frederick and Caprivi saw no need for such extravagance. Germany's strength lay in its land army, not a bloated navy to challenge an ally. After a heated debate, Tirpitz relented, and in 1898, the German-British naval treaty was signed, allying the maritime forces against the French. That same year, British Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain and Caprivi signed the Anglo-German Pact, pulling Britain from its splendid isolation to join Germany in the Triple Alliance alongside Austria and Italy, forming the Quadruple Alliance. The treaty bound both to neutrality and conflicts with third powers, encircling France by land and sea. Frederick's diplomacy had thwarted a Franco-Russian alliance, leaving France isolated and Germany secure. The Quadruple Alliance had curbed Russian expansion, and the warmongers in France could do little to challenge this status quo. However, despite Frederick's pacifist nature, war appeared to brew on the horizon, and, as Bismarck had prophesied on his deathbed, some damn foolish thing in the Balkans did trigger such a conflict. In 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, outraging Serbia, who had their own designs on the territory, so Bosnians and Serbs resisted the formal Habsburg occupation. The Russian government was equally outraged, and despite their disastrous war with Japan in 1905, began to mobilize along Austria-Hungary's borders. Tsar Nicholas was under huge amounts of pressure as he had been criticized for passively allowing the Germans to sidestep them numerous times in the past. German diplomats in Vienna, Moscow, and Belgrade tried to calm the situation, but Russia and Serbia ignored the Kaiser's call for peace. Frederick reminded the Tsar that an attack on Austria-Hungary could draw Germany, Britain, and Italy against Russia, effectively a death wish for the Romanovs. Serbia was undeterred, so declared war as the situation spiraled out of control, hoping to force a Russian entrance. The eyes of the world were now on Russia. Within hours, Austro-Hungarian artillery began to shell Belgrade. Russia, the self-proclaimed protector of the Slavs, just don't ask Poland or Ukraine, ultimately backed down, not declaring war. While Germany, Britain, and France readied their troops, the conflict remained a Balkan affair. The newly independent Bulgarians, allies with the Habsburgs and Hohenzollerns, eagerly joined in the invasion of Serbia. Without Russian manpower and invaded from both sides, the war was a lost cause. Although some Russian military aid was sent to the Serbs, it was not close to enough. By March 1909, Austro-Hungarian forces had captured most of Serbia, while the Bulgarians occupied the east. By July, the war was over. Serbia's gambit proved fatal. The Swift War lasted less than 10 months, leading to the total dissolution of Serbia. At the peace conference in Budapest, an alien Frederick tried to oversee the peace negotiations and supervise the partition of Serbia, but the Germans, who stayed out of the affair, had little say. Despite their alliance with Germany, Britain, and Italy, Habsburg Kaiser Franz Joseph and his ministers viewed this as a matter of national importance, so pushed for maximalist aims. With their historical aims from the Great War in mind, Austria annexed Belgrade, which was Hungarian long before Serbia ever took it, and some minor border territories, which were colonized by Germans and Magyars after expelling the locals. Novi Pazar, the Habsburgs' other occupation separating Serbia from Montenegro, was also formally annexed into the empire. Bulgaria took further bites out of Serbia in the east. What was left of Serbia became a Habsburg protectorate under military occupation, known as Raska. The name was an old medieval term for Serbia, meant as a further humiliation as even their name was taken from them. Despite the complete collapse of Serbia, in the eyes of the world, Russia was the ultimate loser of the war. The Russian gamble on Serbia instead of Bulgaria back in 1885 had failed spectacularly. Serbia was dead, while Bulgaria was firmly in the German camp. Many within Russia began to fear that this Quadruple Alliance was lining up for an invasion of the motherland, where they would meet a fate as cruel as the one doled out to the Serbs. As soon as the peace concluded, Russian diplomats met with their French counterparts in Paris, formalizing a Franco-Russian alliance to challenge their enemies. Tensions dramatically rose across the continent as a grander conflict seemed destined. But, in the eyes of Frederick, Germany had already dodged a monumental bullet. Kaiser Frederick's death in 1914, at the old age of 83, left Germany in the hands of his 55-year-old son, Wilhelm II, brimming with ambition. The liberalized empire Frederick forged faced new trials as Wilhelm took the reins. His militaristic zeal a stark contrast to his father's restraint. Russia's shadow loomed large as Nicholas II began a massive series of military expansions since their diplomatic humiliation in the Balkans. However, this was too late for Nicholas, falling victim to a brutal coup in 1918, assassinated by his military. His brother, Michael II, seized the throne, promising to restore glory to Russia. Nicholas's German wife, Alexandra, and their children escaped the plotters and fled to Hesse, her homeland, lending credence to the conspirators' claim that she had been a covert German agent. Michael cared little for Moscow's politics, totally committed to completing his brother's military reconstruction and modernization as he set his sights on expansion. Not to be outdone, Wilhelm saw this as a threat and went to work, strengthening the army, caring little for the navy as he begrudgingly accepted his father's British alliance had borne fruit. Once Frederick's lackeys were cleared out from the military, and the old guard of true Prussian militarists were back steering the ship, he worked in tandem to roll back the Reichstag's powers, building an uneasy alliance between the conservatives, the Catholics, and the Polish and Danish minorities to check the left. Nonetheless, thanks to the excellent reign of Kaiser Frederick III, Germany and Europe avoided any major conflicts as peace held at the beginning of the 20th century. If you enjoyed this video on the German Empire, click here to watch what could have happened if the Kaisers stayed in power after World War I. Special thanks to Ian, who's a history teacher and sent me the timeline for the video. I hope your students enjoy this when you show it to them in the upcoming school year. And kids, your teacher's super cool, so make sure you're paying attention. If you want to turn your timelines into videos like this, you can find all that information in the description. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon to get ad-free viewing, maps, and more. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I'll see you soon.